welcome back to part 2 of Ghosts of the Wayside. In the mid-1980s, a young man was driving from Thorpe Sockton towards Clacton. It was a bitterly cold, snowy February night, and, travelling down Tan Lane, he turned into Holland Road and almost ran into an eye-catching figure walking along the road. It was an elderly, thick-set man in a Victorian-style overcoat and tall chimney-pot hat, and the driver had the impression that he was bearded. He was carrying a walking stick, which he held out in front of him, as if he was blind. But then the driver looked back to make sure the old man was all right. There was no one to be seen. There are other reports of sightings of the same figure. Sometimes he is accompanied by an old lady who appears to be hooded, but so far no one seems to know who they are. In 1991, a young lady was driving from Great Holland towards Clacton, and as she approached the humpback bridge over the railway, she and her passenger noticed how misty it was becoming. They were approaching the junction with Tan Lane when she turned to switch off her car radio, and her passenger screamed because in that split second, when her attention lapsed, a pedestrian appeared right in front of the car. She applied the brakes as fast as she could, but, as she reported later, the man was halfway through the bonnet of the car. Both driver and passenger felt icy cold as they realised that the man had apparently walked straight through the car. They were convinced they had encountered a ghost, not least because of his unusual appearance. He was wearing a long black coat and a tall black hat. Remembering the previous story, the area and the man's old-fashioned appearance, this could have been another encounter with the same ghost. Yet another Clacton story was reported in the Sunday Express. This was December 1983. Mrs. Evans of Jaywick encountered a figure dressed in white shirt and dinner jacket who walked straight into the path of her car and then just vanished. It was broad daylight, and all the 4 occupants of the car saw him very clearly. There was no bump, no body after we stopped to look round, said Mrs. Evans. There are several stories of phantom coaches, such as the ghostly coach driven by a headless coachman, which drives towards the ruins of Acton Place, near Long Melford. It was once home to the eccentric 18th century miser Robert Jennings, who lived like a tramp, although he was reported to be the richest man in England. As the coach reaches the gates to the drive, it vanishes. A hearse driven by yet another headless driver passes along the walls of Mistley from time to time, and at Audley End, near Saffron Walden, a phantom coach sometimes emerges from the Lion Gate. It sets off along Audley End Road, over the hump-backed bridge, and turns right into Chestnut Avenue. Where's it going? Some say it has been seen on the main Newport Road, the B1383. An old-fashioned cyclist seen on the road near Folkbourne Hall, south of Braintree, seems to approach oncoming traffic with lethal intent. After dark, he appears suddenly without lights on the wrong side of the road and targets other cyclists, who are sometimes knocked off their bicycles if they cannot avoid him quickly enough. One night, he apparently went too far and rode towards a motorcyclist. The rider had no chance of avoiding him and went straight through what he soon realised was a notorious phantom cyclist. Shaken by his experience, the motorcyclist rode off as fast as he could go, but no doubt the phantom biker survived to continue his ghostly road rage attacks regardless. Cyclists, beware. Ghostly monks are very prevalent in Britain, and at Christmas 1977, Richard Sage was driving with 3 friends along St Mary's Lane. This was near Cranham, now just inside the Greater London boundary. Now a figure appeared out of nowhere, crossed in front of the car, and then simply disappeared. Richard's friend, D. Goss, sitting beside him, saw the figure and both agreed that it was a hood or cowl and looked like a monk. Dee said it seemed to have no legs, it just floated across the road in front of us. I saw it very distinctively. The two friends sitting in the back of the car had not noticed the figure at all. In December 1979, when Richard was driving along at about the same place as before, the figure appeared again and behaved just as it had on the previous occasions. Although the police suggested that he had seen a local tramp, Richard and his friend disagreed, but it was later found that there had been other sightings at Christmas 1976 and 1978. Another phantom monk made a number of appearances in 1964 in the vicinity of Holy Cross Church at Basildon. This is Newtown. Early one January morning, two young women were cycling to work at a newly opened Ford assembly plant. As they passed the church, a monk-like figure floated across the road in front of them and, terrified, the girls pedalled as fast as they could to get away from it. The same thing happened again a few mornings later, but this time the figure stood stock still in front of one of the bicycles, and before she could stop herself, the rider went straight through it. Afterwards she said, "The air was cold and clammy. I went numb all over and could not speak." Not long after this encounter, a number of women cleaners from the same factory were walking or cycling home in the early hours, and they all saw the monk, which one described as just floating in deadly silence. The monk was a striking figure wearing a crimson gown, and the witnesses agreed that he seemed to emerge from the bushes at one side of the road to pass in eerie silence over the road into the churchyard of 13th century Holy Cross, where he disappeared among the gravestones. The story of the monk's early morning appearances was widely reported in the press. Local residents confirmed that the churchyard of Holy Cross Church was believed to be haunted. However, the then curator of the church said he had never seen anything unusual, although he did admit that while in the church at night sometimes he thought he heard sounds in the porch rather like footsteps, but was sure there was a reasonable explanation. However, he suggested that the witnesses' descriptions of the monk-like apparition could fit a former Basildon rector who later became Dean of London Church, which would account for his crimson gown. Just why this reverend gentleman should have spent the early mornings frightening passing workers is a mystery, but when the publicity brought a flock of eager ghost hunters and sightseers to the churchyard, it was too much for him, and afterwards the Ford workers were unable to travel to work in peace. They were able to travel to work in peace because apparently the sightings stopped, which is interesting. Maybe he got fed up and stopped appearing, or maybe his energy just dissipated and went on elsewhere, who knows. So that is the rest of the Ghosts of the Wayside. Thank you for listening and many blessings.